Welcome to Reformed Thinking and our show, The Deep Dive.
It's good to be here.
Today, we're opening up a really remarkable piece of theological work from Jonathan Edwards. We're going to be looking at his detailed thoughts on the incarnation of Christ.
And specifically, what that single event means for what he calls the entire work of redemption.
Right, and this is a listener request, actually, focusing on a part where Edwards explains how Christ's arrival wasn't random at all.
Not in the slightest. He argues it happened at the one precise, perfect moment in all of human history, an idea he calls the fullness of time.
So our goal today is to really get into Edwards' view of this period of Christ's humiliation, that short span of 30 or so years, and see why he presents it as the single most decisive action in cosmic history.
It's a huge claim. He's arguing that this sliver of time holds more weight than everything that came before it and everything that will come after.
So he sees history as moving toward a specific goal, teleological.
Completely. And that goal is the glorification of Christ through redemption. For Edwards, that brief period of Christ's life is the very center, the axis, on which all of history turns. Everything before was just preparation.
Even the eternal counsels of the Trinity.
Yes, even the plans of God before time began were, in his view, chiefly focused on what would happen during those 33 years.
Okay, let's start with that core claim then, because it really changes how you look at the Old Testament. The claim is that the purchase of redemption was only made during Christ's humiliation.
Right, and that's a big statement, because what about all the sacrifices, the millions of lambs offered up?
That's the question. Did they do nothing? Were they useless?
They're not useless, but they weren't the price. Edwards is very clear on this. Those sacrifices were like shadows. They were types and figures appointed by God to point forward to the real thing.
So they were like a promise of payment, but not the payment itself.
A down payment, maybe, but not the settling of the debt.
Yeah.
If they had actually purchased redemption, if they had paid the price, then Christ's coming would have been, well, unnecessary.
So the transaction, the actual satisfying of divine justice, it doesn't even begin until the Word is made flesh.
That's his starting point. The purchase begins the moment of incarnation. And the entire time of Christ's humiliation, his life, his suffering, his death, right up until the moment he rose. All of that was part of making the purchase.
So there's a very precise endpoint to this transaction.
A very precise one. He says the purchase was entirely and completely finished. The instant Christ's human nature was no longer under the power of death.
Resurrection.
The resurrection. At that moment, the debt was paid. He uses this great old phrase, settled down to the utmost farthing.
That's such legal financial language.
It is. It's meant to convey absolute completion. And because it's complete, nothing more was done after the resurrection to purchase salvation, nor will anything ever be done. The work of purchasing is closed.
So everything that happens now, the spread of the gospel, the work of the Spirit, that's all the application of a finished purchase.
That's the idea. We're living in the time of application, not addition. The price is paid in full.
Which brings up a huge question. If Christ, as God, is infinitely powerful, infinitely sufficient, why did he need to become human at all?
Why the incarnation, right?
What was he lacking as God that he needed to gain by taking on flesh?
And this is where Edwards gets into some very fine but very necessary distinctions. He says Christ became man to capacitate himself for this specific work.
To gain a capacity. That sounds strange when you're talking about God.
It does, but Edwards's point is that the limitation wasn't an imperfection in the divine nature. The limitation was actually its perfection.
Okay, you have to break that down. How does perfection create a limitation?
Well, think about what was required to redeem humanity. Two things, mainly. Obedience to the law given to man, and suffering the penalty for breaking that law.
Okay, obedience and suffering.
The divine nature, because it's perfect, eternal, and unchangeable, is by its very nature incapable of suffering. It's infinitely above it.
So God, as God, can't suffer.
And God, as God, can't obey a law that was made for a creature. He is the lawgiver, not a subject of the law. So to do those two things, to obey and to suffer, he needed to take on a nature that could.
A created nature.
A created nature. While he was infinitely sufficient in his person, he wasn't in an immediate capacity for the job if he remained only God. He needed to be able to stand legally in our place.
That distinction is so critical. Infinitely sufficient versus immediately capable.
It's the whole hinge of the argument for the incarnation's necessity.
Okay, so a created nature was required. That brings us to the next logical step. Why a human nature? Why not an angel? An angel is a created being.
A great question, and Edwards gives 3 clear reasons. It couldn't just be any creature, it had to be a human being.
What's the first reason?
It goes back to obedience. The law that was broken was a law given to mankind. The command, thou shalt not eat thereof, was given to human nature in Adam.
So the same nature that broke the law had to be the one to keep it perfectly.
That's it. For the law to be truly honored and satisfied, the very nature to which it was given had to fulfill it. An angel living a perfect angelic life wouldn't have satisfied the demands of man's law. It had to be a man obeying as a man.
It's a matter of legal standing. An angel isn't part of the same legal entity.
You've got it. That handles the obedience part. Then there's the second reason, which deals with the suffering.
The punishment.
Right. The threatening, thou shalt surely die, was also spoken to human nature. So the nature that sinned must be the nature that bears the punishment.
The nature that was threatened with death has to be the one that dies.
It's a matter of justice. If an angel had suffered, it wouldn't have legally paid the debt for humanity. The substitute has to match the one he's substituting for.
Okay, that makes sense. Obedience and suffering both required a human nature. What's the third reason? It feels a little different from the first two.
It is. It's less about the legal requirements and more about the fittingness of the location, the stage of redemption.
You mean the planet Earth?
The planet Earth. God saw fit that the same world that was the stage of man's fall should also be the stage of his redemption.
So the recovery had to happen right here, in the same place as the crime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Christ had to come into this sinful, miserable, undone world to save it. He had to come down to man, to our home, so that, as John says, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us.
He didn't just become one of us in nature, he joined us in our place.
He did. And that brings us to the actual mechanics of how this happened, which Edwards finds just as full of purpose.
Let's talk about the conception.
He stresses that it happened in the womb of a woman from the human race. This made him truly the Son of Man and a son of David, a child of Abraham, fulfilling all the specific covenant promises.
But the way it happened was unique. It wasn't ordinary generation.
No, and this was critical. It was by the power of the Holy Ghost. He was formed from the substance of Mary's body, which makes him truly her son, truly human. But the supernatural mode meant he could bypass the corruption of original sin.
Which is absolutely necessary for a redeemer. He couldn't be sinful himself.
A sinful substitute can't save anyone. He had to be a pure, spotless lamb. So this supernatural conception ensured his sinlessness from the very start.
And what about the birth itself?
Edwards makes a point to say that after the supernatural conception, the rest of the process was natural. The development in the womb, the birth itself, it all happened in the way of nature.
So he was a real baby, a real human being.
A real human being in every sense. This wasn't a phantom or an illusion. It was a real incarnation.
So if the nature had to be just right, the timing had to be just right too. This brings us to this idea of the fullness of time. Why then? Why not 2,000 years earlier? Why wait so long?
This is a huge part of Edwards' argument. The delay wasn't a delay in a negative sense, it was a preparation. He goes through all of history to show that any other time would have been inappropriate.
Okay, let's walk through that. What about the very beginning, the pre-flood era? Why was that not the right time?
Well, for one, the full extent of the ruin from the fall hadn't really been seen yet.
Things were bad, but not as bad as they were going to get.
Right. The curse needed to be fully executed in a global sense, which happened with the flood. The world needed to see the totality of God's wrath against sin before the Redeemer could arrive.
And he also mentions the long lifespans of that time.
He does. When people lived almost 1,000 years, the curse of death, unto dust thou shalt return, hadn't fully hit home. The painful shortness of life, the mortality we feel, that had to become the universal human experience first to show what Christ came to save us from.
So humanity needed to feel the full weight of the curse before the cure could be offered.
That's the idea. The problem had to be fully diagnosed.
Okay, so after the flood, we enter the pre-Mosaic era. What still wasn't right at that point?
At that point, mankind had pretty much fallen into universal paganism. The knowledge of the true God was almost lost. So the need for Christ as the light of the world was becoming clear.
But something was still missing.
The law. God hadn't yet given the written law through Moses. The world needed the law to act as a mirror, to show the true depth of human sinfulness and our inability to save ourselves. The law had to come first to show that no one could keep it.
The law increases the sense of need.
It does. It magnifies the trespass. Also, man's lifespan was still being reduced. It wasn't until around Moses' time that it settled at the 70 or 80 years we see today.
Okay, so after Moses, the law is given, the sacrificial system is in place. Why the next long delay of, what, 1,500 years?
Well, a few things were happening. First, God let the Gentile nations stew in their own pagan darkness for centuries,
Why?
to demonstrate through long, painful experience that their condition was hopeless. They tried everything: philosophy, idolatry, politics, and nothing worked. It showed the absolute necessity of the heavenly physician,
So humanity had to exhaust all its own self-help remedies first.
and proved that they all failed. But there was another reason for the wait. A later arrival meant the world would be much more populated,
More people on the earth.
which means a more extensive kingdom for Christ. His victory over Satan is more glorious because of the sheer multitude of his conquests.
And what about Israel during this time? They weren't just waiting around.
No, the church itself needed that long period of preparation. The Messiah had to be long prefigured, foretold, and expected. You needed centuries for the prophecies to be written, for the types and shadows of the sacrificial system to unfold, so that when he did come, the faithful would recognize him.
So you're building up a huge weight of expectation over centuries.
A huge weight. The historical record had to be written and preserved first.
All right, let's jump to the geopolitical situation of the first century. Edwards makes a very specific point about the Roman Empire. Why was that the perfect setting?
He sees it as absolutely crucial. Christ came during the time of the Roman monarchy, which was the greatest and strongest of the four great empires from prophecy.
And for Edwards, that empire represented something.
It represented the height of Satan's visible kingdom in the world. It was organized, powerful, and global in its reach.
So God deliberately staged the confrontation for when the enemy was at its strongest.
That's it. So that the victory would be all the more glorious. By overcoming the Roman Empire, not with armies, but with the cross and the gospel, Christ visibly triumphed over Satan's kingdom in its greatest strength and glory.
But there's also a very practical side to the Roman Empire's role, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. Think of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It created a level of stability and safety for travel that hadn't existed before.
And the roads.
The Roman roads, they built this incredible network that connected the whole Mediterranean world, and you had a common language, Greek, that was spoken almost everywhere.
So the very mechanisms of empire became the highways for the gospel.
God used Caesar's ambition to create the perfect infrastructure for the rapid spread of the Christian message. It would have been almost impossible 500 years earlier.
That's an amazing thought. Let's look at the period just before that, after the Babylonian captivity. What preparations happened then?
That era was also vital. For one, it's when you get the great histories of the Greek and Roman world being written.
Why was that necessary?
Because those histories provided a permanent record of the failure of the pagan world, the chaos, the immorality. It's all documented, building the historical case for why a savior was needed.
This was also the great age of Greek philosophy. Plato, Aristotle.
Yes, and that was also a preparation. Learning and human wisdom needed to flourish and then fail to show their insufficiency.
To prove that humanity couldn't think its way to salvation.
Right. God let humanity build its best philosophical systems, and when they couldn't fix the human heart, the gospel arrived with the answer.
And what about the Jewish people themselves after the captivity?
The diaspora, the scattering of the Jews, was key. It planted synagogues and communities who knew the scriptures all across the Roman Empire.
So they became like spiritual beachheads.
A perfect way to put it. They were the initial places where the gospel could be preached. And their loss of a central homeland also made it clear that the old temple-based system of worship was coming to an end. The new covenant had to be portable.
It really does seem like Edwards sees history as this single, complex machine with every gear turning perfectly to bring everything to a head at that one moment.
That's his view. Not a single bit of it was accidental. Every historical movement, every empire, every philosophy was part of the divine setup.
So now that we've established the timing, let's look at the event itself. Edwards makes a huge deal about the greatness of the Incarnation.
He does. He ranks it as a greater event than the creation of the world.
Greater than creating the entire universe from nothing. How does he justify that?
He argues that it was a great thing for God to make a creature, but it was an infinitely greater thing for the Creator himself to become a creature.
The act of condescension.
Condescension is what makes it so mind-boggling. The greatest person who ever was or will be was born in that moment. The creation was the stage, but this was the main drama.
And yet, this greatest event in history was surrounded by, well, the most humble circumstances imaginable.
And that paradox is at the very heart of the story. Take Mary, for instance. He points out she was a poor virgin.
How do we know she was poor?
From her offering at the temple after Jesus' birth, she offered 2 turtle doves. According to the law in Leviticus, that was the specific offering allowed for people who couldn't afford a lamb.
A small detail, but it speaks volumes about their financial state.
It does. And even though they were of the royal line of David, the family was, as Edwards puts it, extremely reduced. Joseph was the rightful heir to the throne, but the line of David had fallen into total obscurity.
And then the location. Bethlehem.
A fulfillment of the prophecy in Micah. And how is it fulfilled? Through a decree from a Roman emperor to tax the world, which forced this poor couple to travel to that specific small town at that specific time.
It's amazing how a global political event was used to fulfill a local prophecy.
Providence at work. And then, of course, the birth itself happens in the lowest possible condition.
A stable, laid in a manger, a feeding trough for animals.
It's almost absurd. The king of the universe, the creator of all things, enters his world in a barn. The humility is just staggering.
But even in that humble setting, there were supernatural signs happening all around it. Edwards lists them out. Let's start with the return of the Spirit.
Yes, this is a big one for him. He notes that for 400 years, since the prophet Malachi, there had been spiritual silence. No prophecy, no visions from God.
The heavens were closed.
But with the Incarnation, that silence is shattered. The Spirit returns in a flurry of activity. You have visions given to Zacharias, to Mary, to Joseph.
And it wasn't just visions.
No, the Spirit comes upon people. Elizabeth speaks prophetically, Mary sings her song, Zacharias prophesies, then the shepherds, Simeon, Anna in the temple. It's this concentrated burst of divine communication, signaling a new age has dawned.
And it wasn't just a quiet event. Edwards says great notice was taken of it, starting in heaven.
Starting in heaven. The angels, the glorious inhabitants, they noticed immediately. You see it in the joyful songs the shepherds heard. Edwards says this was the greatest act of God the angels had ever seen.
Greater than when they saw the creation of the world.
Even greater. He says they sang at creation, but they rejoiced even more at the birth of their creator as a creature. They had been involved in the plan of redemption for ages, ministering to Abraham and Jacob, and now they saw the culmination of it all.
And on earth, the church, or at least the faithful remnant, also took notice.
You see that joy in Elizabeth and Mary and Simeon and Anna. He makes a point that heaven and the true church on earth were united in their praise.
But it went beyond Israel. The Gentile world was notified as well.
Yes, God honored his son by stirring up some of the wisest of the Gentiles, the wise men, to travel a great distance to worship him.
And they were led by a miraculous star.
A star which Edward sees as a symbol for Christ himself, the bright and morning star. And he speculates that maybe they knew to look for it because of the ancient prophecy of Balaam about a star rising out of Jacob.
Or just the general expectation of a Messiah that had spread through the Jewish dispersion.
Either way, it was a divine signal to the non-Jewish world that their king had arrived.
The event also fulfilled specific prophecies about the temple.
It did. When Christ was brought to the temple as an infant for Mary's purification, that simple act fulfilled Haggai's prophecy that the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory.
The glory had arrived, even if it was in the form of a baby.
Exactly. And it also fulfilled Malachi's promise that the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple. His very first visits validated his identity.
Okay, let's cover the last great sign that the fullness of time had arrived. This is a big one. The departure of the scepter from Judah.
This is a huge confirmation for Edwards. He connects it directly to that ancient prophecy in Genesis that the scepter, or the right to rule, would not depart from Judah until Shiloh, the Messiah, had come.
And he says this happened right around the time of Christ's birth.
Precisely with the death of Herod the Great. Edwards explains that even though Judah had been conquered before, by Babylon, by Persia, by Greece, they had always maintained some kind of internal governor or ruler.
They still had some local authority.
They did. Even Herod, who was a client king of Rome, was still a king of Judah. He held the power of life and death.
But after Herod died, that all changed.
It changed completely. His successor was quickly removed by the Romans, and from then on, Judah was ruled directly by a Roman governor like Pontius Pilate. They lost their king, and they lost their authority to carry out capital punishment.
And we see that confirmed in the Gospels.
We do. When the Jews bring Jesus to Pilate, they say, "It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." For Edwards, that's the historical proof. The scepter was gone, Shiloh had come, the timing was perfect.
So when you look at it through Edwards's lens, the Incarnation isn't just a beautiful story or a miracle. It's this perfectly engineered, legally necessary event.
It's an answer to a cosmic legal problem, executed with perfect timing after centuries of deliberate, divine preparation. It shows God's absolute control over every detail of history.
So if we take this all in, what does this highly structured, legally precise view of history mean for us? I mean, Edwards's whole mapping of prophecy and history shows that Christ's purchase of our redemption was calculated, as you said, to the utmost farthing.
I think it gives us a deep sense of confidence. If the central event of history, the purchase, was governed with such precision, then we can trust that the ongoing application of that redemption is just as orderly and certain. History isn't just a chaotic series of events.
Which leads to a final thought. Considering that incredible precision of the fullness of time in the first century, what might that say about our own historical moment?
That's a great question to ponder.
Right. If that long delay was all about preparation for the purchase of redemption, what kind of preparation is God making now in our world, in our culture, in geopolitics, for the next great unfolding of the application of that redemption?
What things are happening now that we might only understand in retrospect?
Something to think about. If the timing was necessary then, every day now is also part of a deliberate, unfolding purpose.
A worthwhile thought for anyone who believes in the sovereignty of God.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.